You make $17 an hour fixing other people's toilets, and this morning's work order is a running tank in Unit 214, a fill valve, an $11 part, 20 minutes if the shutoff cooperates. The resident watches you work while telling you about her landlord, the faceless company that owns this whole complex, the rent that went up $40, the pool that's been closed 2 summers. You nod in the right places. You are good at nodding in the right places. What she does not know, what nobody on any work order has ever known, is that 8 miles east of here, on a road with a feed store and a church and not much else, there is a quiet piece of land with your name buried somewhere deep in its paperwork, and that land does something this wrench will never do. It earns while you sleep. You hand the resident her work order copy, tell her to call if the tank keeps running, and load your bucket into a van with someone else's logo on it. Nobody has ever once asked the maintenance guy what he owns. This is the story of why that question would have been worth asking. It starts with your grandmother's kitchen floor, if you trace it honestly. She lived 19 years in a mobile home park called Sunrise Estates, a decent one, and when you were a kid you thought she owned her home free and clear because that's what she said, paid off in full, and it wasn't until you were 23, patching her subfloor with your first set of real tools, that she explained the part that never made sense to you. The home was hers. The land underneath it was not. $260 a month, forever, for the dirt. And if the dirt's owner ever sold to somebody who wanted the land for something better, 40 families' paid-off homes became 40 problems, because a mobile home, despite the name, mostly cannot move. Moving one runs $5,000 to $10,000, and half of them are too old to survive the trip. You sat on her floor with a jigsaw and absorbed the strangest ownership arrangement in American housing, people who own the house but rent the ground, and the phrase your grandmother used without bitterness, just as fact, stuck somewhere behind your sternum and never left. Honey, everybody in here is a homeowner standing on somebody else's land. The maintenance job taught you buildings from the inside for 6 years, and the apartment complex taught you something better, how institutional landlords actually run numbers, because you saw the spreadsheets nobody hides from the maintenance guy. You saw what turnovers cost, what deferred repairs became, which line items the owners tracked and which they ignored, and you noticed the oldest pattern in real estate from the service side of it. The buildings made money on borrowed money, and the men who owned them had never held a wrench. Meanwhile, you read about mobile home parks at night the way you'd once read about everything else that seemed like a locked door, and the industry's own numbers kept saying the quiet part in print. Parks were the last cheap housing in America, demand endless, supply legally frozen, because almost no town zones, new parks, ever, meaning existing parks were a grandfathered monopoly nobody could rebuild, and the small ones were owned, overwhelmingly, by tired septuagenarians, and the big private equity firms were rolling them up and doing to 1,000 Sunrise Estates exactly what you watched. A rent ledger due to your grandmother, ratchet, 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 ratchet. The buys were coming either way, was the thing. The only question in your county was which kind. Meadowlark Court was owned by a man named Harlan, 76, who ran it from a folding table in the park's old office trailer, and you met him because his water main broke on a Sunday and the plumber he'd used for 30 years had died, and a resident's cousin knew a maintenance guy who did side work, which was you. You dug with him. That matters to the story, so it gets said plainly. A 76-year-old man in rubber boots stood in the trench with you for 5 hours handing you fittings, and by the end of it you knew the park's whole circulatory system and half its biography. 41 lots, 38 occupied, rents at $210, unraised in 9 years because raising them felt like robbing neighbors. A well system he babied, a lagoon he feared, 3 park-owned homes he rented outright and regretted, and no children who wanted any of it. His daughter was a nurse in Phoenix. His son did something with software he couldn't describe. He paid you $300 cash and told you that you were the first person in 10 years who'd asked where the shutoffs were before asking where the money was, and 11 months later, when a postcard from a Dallas investment group offered him $1.1 million for the land, cash, quick close, he drove to the apartment complex where you worked, waited by the maintenance shop like a man waiting outside a principal's office, and asked if you wanted to buy a mobile home park before the sunglasses people got it. You did not have $1.1 million. You had $61,000, saved across 8 years of side work and living like the maintenance guy everyone already assumed you were, and you told Harlan the truth, which turned out to be the winning bid. He counted himself downward on the spot, $940,000, and then said the sentence that made it real, "I'll carry the paper." Seller financing the whole thing, 20% down, which you didn't have either, so the structure got built the way real deals actually get built. Ugly, over weeks, at the folding table. Your $61,000 plus $40,000 from your Uncle Ray, a retired lineman who demanded 8% and got it and has never once let you forget he's a lender, structured properly by a lawyer as the down payment on a 940 purchase, Harlan holding a note for the balance at 6% over 25 years, secured by the park itself, with a clause his Phoenix daughter insisted on, that if you missed 3 payments the whole thing reverted, and a clause your lawyer insisted on, that Harlan's family couldn't call the note early as long as you paid on time. 2 families, both protected from each other, both betting on the same 9 acres. The monthly note came to $5,200. The park, at Harlan's ancient rents, grossed about $8,300. It was thin. It was terrifying. It was yours, and you kept fixing toilets the whole time because the note did not care how you felt. Here is what you actually bought, because it is not what people picture. You did not buy 41 homes. You bought dirt, pipes, a well, a lagoon, gravel roads, and a rent roll, and the homes belong to the residents, which is precisely why the model is the most stable thing in real estate and why the vultures circle it. Your tenants are homeowners. They fix their own faucets. They plant hedges. They stay decades. Turnover at Meadowlark ran under 5% a year, and the entire operating burden of the property was infrastructure and grounds, which is to say, the exact skill set of a man who had spent 6 years as the person institutions called when things leaked. Your first year's improvements cost under $30,000, and you did most of the labor yourself on weekends. Well house rebuilt, master shutoffs mapped and replaced, roads regraded and graveled, dead trees dropped, streetlights rewired, the old pool Harlan filled with dirt in '98 stayed dirt. Some monuments deserve their rest. Rents went to $265 with 90 days' notice and a letter explaining exactly what the money had fixed and would fix. $30 under the county's going rate on purpose, and of 38 households, 37 stayed, and the one that left sold their home to a family off the wait list within 3 weeks. The wait list was new. You started it. Harlan had been turning people away by phone for years and never wrote a single name down. The stress test came in year 2, and it came from underground, because in parks it always comes from the water or the sewer. Ask anyone who owns one. The lagoon, the park's antique wastewater system, flagged on a state inspection, and the remediation quote from the first engineer was $260,000, a number that would have ended you, note, park, Uncle Ray's 8%, all of it. You did what maintenance guys do and got a second opinion and a third, and then found the retired county sanitarian who'd inspected Meadowlark for 20 years, a man named Gill, who walked the berm for an hour and said the system didn't need replacing. It needed the sludge survey, the aerator fixed, and the duckweed managed, and pointed you to the 2 contractors who did that work without the new system markup. Total cost, $41,000 plus $1,400 a year in monitoring you should have been doing anyway. The state signed off. You aged a decade that quarter and learned the industry's dirtiest secret from the inside. Half the parks that die don't die of their problems. They die of the first quote, accepted by an owner who had no one like Gill. No trench time, no way to smell the difference between broken and neglected. Your wrench years, it turned out, weren't the thing you escaped to buy the park. They were the reason the park survived you buying it. Somewhere in year 3, the arithmetic crossed the line you'd drawn in a notebook the week of closing. Rents at $285, occupancy at 40 of 41. The 3 park-owned homes sold off to the renters on small contracts because you wanted tenants who owned, gross north of $11,000. The note at $5,200, insurance, taxes, water testing, the reserve account feeding itself first, $300 every month, untouchable, and what remained cleared $4,000 a month, which was more than your maintenance wage, which meant the park had, by the notebook's own definition, replaced you. You gave notice the following spring, and not because of the math, because of a Tuesday. The complex had you replace a bathroom vanity in a unit whose rent you knew had gone up $90 for an owner 900 miles away, while your phone buzzed with a Meadowlark resident asking if you could look at the pressure on Lane C, and you stood there holding someone else's faucet, understanding with perfect clarity that you were spending your best hours as the hands of a machine you'd already built a better version of. Your boss took it fine. The residents of the complex lost the only maintenance tech who answered on Sundays. You still feel a little bad about that. Only a little. You never told the residents, is the part people don't believe. Fieldstone Land Company signs the letters. A management email answers the calls, which is you at your kitchen table. The man who regrades the roads and rebuilt the well house is, as far as most of Meadowlark knows, a contractor. The company sends a quiet guy in a work jacket who's been coming so long he knows everyone's dogs. Rosa in Lot 12 leaves Tamales on the fence post for him at Christmas. Big Ed in Lot 30 flags him down to complain about the company, the faceless company, rents up $20 again this year, and the quiet contractor nods in the right places. He is good at nodding in the right places, and then Big Ed says, "But I'll give them this. They fix things, not like my sister's park down in Riverside, where the new owners raise lots to $5.50 and let the well go brown." And you drive home past the feed store with the window down and sit with the strangest feeling your strange arrangement produces, which is this. The residents don't hate their landlord because their landlord does the job right, and their landlord can afford to do the job right partly because he isn't performing wealth at anyone. No lifted truck, no office, no logo polo, and the anonymity you built for protection turned out to be an operating advantage. Because a landlord nobody can picture is a landlord nobody organizes their resentment around. The company stays faceless. The face stays free. Rosa's tamales are the best compensation package you have ever received. The Dallas people never stop, by the way. The postcards come to Fieldstone's registered agent now, 4 or 5 a year, and 2 years ago, an actual human from an actual fund called the management line, which rang at your kitchen table during dinner, and offered $1.6 million before you'd said anything but hello. Your wife watched you across the casserole while a man with a headset voice explained cap rate compression to a maintenance tech, and you said thanks, not selling, and he said everyone says that, and you said, then I guess I'm everyone, and hung up. And your wife said 1.6, and you sat with it honestly, because that's real money, walk-away money by any normal accounting. Here is why it stayed a no. The park nets around $60,000 a year now and climbs a little every year. Forever, zoning has seen to that. And Harlan's note burns down every month like a candle you can read by, 11 years left, and when it's gone, the same dirt throws off double. But under the arithmetic sits the thing you'd have to sell with it. 41 families' floors. The fund spreadsheet has a row for revenue growth and no row for what happens to Rosa at $550 a month, and you have stood on too many of these particular kitchen floors, jigsaw in hand, to pretend you don't know exactly which row wins. Your grandmother rented her rectangle for 19 years. Somebody owned that dirt the whole time. It took you 30 years to understand that the question was never whether somebody would. It was only, ever, what kind of somebody. If you ever had to explain the machine to someone with a spreadsheet instead of a wrench, it would go like this. Meadowlark's 41 lots at $295 gross, about $12,000 a month when full, and the expense side is the leanest in residential real estate because the residents own the structures. No roofs, no furnaces, no appliances, no interior, anything. What Fieldstone pays for is water, the well's power and testing, the lagoon's monitoring, road gravel, mowing the commons, insurance on dirt and pipes, property taxes that stay gentle because the county assesses land, not the homes on it, and the reserve feeding itself first every month before anything reaches you. The industry measures expenses as a share of income, and parks where tenants own their homes run around 35 to 40%, against 50 or more for apartments. And that spread is not cleverness. It is structural. It is what happens when the people living on the asset maintain the part they own because they own it. Then comes Harlan's note, the 5200, which is where the real quiet magic sits, because every payment is two payments, the interest, which is the cost of the ladder, and the principal, which is the ladder itself, and 11 years from now the note extinguishes and the same rent roll drops an extra $62,000 a year straight through to the bottom line without a single rent raise, which is why you can afford to keep lot rent $30 under market forever and still win. The under market part is not charity either, and you'd say so plainly. Full lots, a wait list, 5% turnover, and residents who defend the park to their own city council when the road bond comes up are worth more than the missing $30 in the only accounting that compounds, occupancy years. The sunglasses funds underwrite rent raises. You underwrite staying. Both models cash flow. Only one of them lets you eat the tamales. Sunrise Estates sold last year. Your grandmother's old park, the one with the kitchen floor, the one where the whole education started. She's 8 years gone now, so she didn't see it, which you've decided is a mercy. A fund out of Denver bought it and two others in a package deal, and you know the numbers because you called the broker pretending to be a disappointed underbidder, which was only half a lie. You'd have bought it in a heartbeat if it had come up alone instead of bundled with two parks 300 miles away. Lot rent was $340 when they closed. It's $495 now, 14 months later, with a new $9 monthly charge for what the letter called infrastructure stewardship, and the well went to a private utility subsidiary that bills separately. And you know all this because Miss Ida still lives in space, 15 three doors from your grandmother's old lot, and Miss Ida calls you sometimes because your grandmother told her years ago that her grandson knew about fixing things. You drove out in March and fixed her heat tape and her skirting vents for nothing, in the rain, on the exact patch of dirt where you learned to hold a flashlight steady at 7 years old, and Miss Ida made you coffee and told you half the park is homes for sale now, little cardboard signs in windows, people trying to get out from under rent, they can't carry on homes, they can't move, and the fund buys the homes cheap when the sellers give up, and rents them back out furnished, and you sat in that kitchen doing the arithmetic you can't turn off, watching the machine you understand better than almost anyone running its other direction, the direction it runs when nobody who owns it has ever knelt on one of its floors. You couldn't buy Sunrise. You made your peace with that, mostly. But Fieldstone's operating agreement got a new paragraph that spring, drafted properly, binding on your heirs, that Meadowlark can never be sold to a buyer who won't sign the rent covenant, and your lawyer said no institutional buyer will ever sign it, and you said slowly, so he'd know you'd chosen the words in advance. I know. That's what it's for. It is a Saturday in October now. You are at Meadowlark with the tractor you bought at auction, dragging the gravel on Lane C before the freeze, and Harlan is there too, in a folding chair by the office trailer, because he comes by most Saturdays, 90 years old next month, to supervise, he says, which means to sit in the sun and tell you which trees his wife planted. His note gets paid on the 1st, automatically, and his Phoenix daughter sends you a Christmas card every year, which your lawyer says is not a standard feature of seller financing. Lot 19's home sold last month, a young couple, first place they've ever owned, and they got the same speech you now give every new household welcome packet. The real rules, the office number that always answers, and no idea that the man dropping off the packet owns the ground they're standing on. The park will clear around $9,000 this month. The rent still rides in the truck because a well house doesn't care what you own. And when the couple in 19 asked, moving day, sweating in the driveway, whether the company that owns this place is decent because they'd heard stories about parks, everybody's heard the stories, you gave them the same nod you've been perfecting since 214's running toilet, the nod that is good in the right places. Anne said the truest sentence you own. The company's just a guy who takes care of things. Then you carried in their box spring, because your grandmother would have expected it, and the dirt under all of you kept doing what dirt does when somebody finally owns it who remembers renting it. It held. If this kind of quiet arithmetic is your kind of story, the subscribe button is right there, and it costs exactly nothing, which is the best price this channel knows. A new one arrives tomorrow, Same time, same desk, different machine.